What did Jesus teach about the law of Moses? Did he say that he came to bring it to an end, as some modern teachers would have you believe, or did he want his followers to obey it? Matthew 5:17-20 is a key passage that speaks to this question. Here, Jesus explains exactly what he came to do with the law and prophets. In this video, we will focus on verse 17, where Jesus says, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." Today, we will explore what Jesus meant by the terms abolish and fulfill. We interrupt this program to bring you this important message. I, David Wilber, have written a new book. But this isn't just any book. It's a deep dive into what Jesus meant when he said he came to fulfill the law. Spoiler alert, fulfilling the law doesn't mean shredding it like a government conspiracy.
Whoa, that sounds amazing, but why is this book relevant to me?
Great question. The insights you'll gain from this book will teach you the secrets of the universe, reveal the location of the Ark of the Covenant, and teach you how to write the perfect love song to win over your crush. Okay, not really, but you will learn about Jesus' perspective on the law of Moses and how his followers should relate to it. This knowledge will help you win many debates with your antinomian acquaintance from high school who comments on all your Facebook posts. Seriously, this book is packed with extensive research and citations that will fill the hearts of Bible nerds worldwide. Gain a solid grasp of this passage and build a firm foundation upon the rock. No, not Dwayne Johnson, though he's definitely more solid than your typical antinomian arguments. It's time to set the record straight about how Jesus fulfilled the law. Order your copy today. I have not come to abolish them. Matthew 5:17-20 is part of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. Following the Beatitudes at the start of his sermon, Jesus calls upon his followers to live as salt and light and to exhibit good works so that the world will give glory to the Father. The rest of the sermon elaborates on the nature of those good works, starting with Jesus' foundational statement about the law in Matthew 5:17-20. This passage offers crucial insight into Jesus' perspective on the law and serves as his thesis statement regarding how his followers should relate to the law. As we will see in future videos when we go through verses 19-20, Jesus expects his followers to obey and teach the law better than the scribes and Pharisees. His followers will exceed the Pharisees in righteousness by adhering to Jesus' proper interpretation of the Torah, which he articulates throughout the rest of the sermon. Jesus begins his statement on the law by commanding his listeners to think correctly about his mission. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or prophets. Here, Jesus prohibits his listeners from even thinking that he came to abolish the law or prophets, which implies that some of his listeners thought that he did come to abolish them. This command against incorrect thinking is perhaps intended to address the Pharisees who repeatedly accused Jesus and his disciples of disregarding the law. Jesus' statement in Matthew 5:17 directly refutes such accusations. As Noel Rabanowitz explains, Jesus' prohibition against thinking that he came to abolish the law is intended to confront, quote, the charge that he has abandoned the Torah of Moses, and reassure his listeners that he, quote, was not guilty of antinomianism. Thus, believing that Jesus came to abolish the law violates Jesus' command in Matthew 5:17. His listeners are not even to think that he came to do that. What did Jesus mean by the law and prophets? Well, this phrase refers to the Hebrew Scriptures or Old Testament. However, within the didactic context of Jesus' sermon, the terms law and prophets also have a legal connotation. When Jesus says that he did not come to abolish the law, he isn't talking about abolishing the law's existence. He is talking about abolishing the law's legal authority. That is, Jesus did not come to abolish the authority of the law or the prophets. But what exactly did Jesus mean when he said that he did not come to abolish? Well, to abolish something means to cause it to be no longer in force. So to abolish the law and prophets means to do away with, annul, or repeal them. In other words, Jesus forbids his listeners from thinking that he came to nullify or repeal God's commandments found in the law and prophets. Several first-century Jewish texts give us additional insight into what it means to abolish the law. Like Matthew 5:17-20, these Jewish texts employ employ the term kataluo, translated abolish in Matthew 5:17, as well as the related term luo, translated relaxes or breaks in Matthew 5:19, in reference to the law. For instance, 4 Maccabees 17:9 characterizes Antiochus as, quote, the tyrant who wished to abolish the way of life of the Hebrews. Moreover, in 4 Maccabees 5, there is an account of Antiochus attempting to compel the priest Eleazar to eat pork. Eleazar refuses, insisting that eating prohibited meats, quote, is an abolishment of the ancestral law. Josephus similarly writes that Antiochus, quote, put pressure upon the Jews to abolish their ancestral customs, leaving their infants uncircumcised and sacrificing swine upon the altar. These examples from Jewish literature show that to abolish the law means to deny the law's authority. Those who abolish the law disregard the law's commandments and encourage others to disregard them as well. Matthew 5:19 confirms this meaning. Therefore, whoever relaxes, luo, one of the least of these commandments, and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. In sum, Jesus commands his listeners not to think that he came to invalidate the commandments in the law and prophets. He reassures them that, unlike Antiochus, this was not his purpose. Believing that Jesus came to nullify the commandments of the Torah breaks Jesus' commandment in Matthew 5:17 against thinking that he came to abolish the law. I have come to fulfill them. Instead of disregarding or nullifying the law and prophets, Jesus said he came to fulfill them. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. What does it mean to fulfill the law and prophets? Well, depending upon the context, the verb to fulfill, plerao, can mean to carry out, to show forth true meaning, or to complete. So, which of these definitions best fits the context? Did Jesus come to carry out the law and prophets, to show the true meaning of the law and prophets, or to complete the law and prophets? In this context, the statement that Jesus came to fulfill the law and prophets is situated between the exhortations to perform good works and to do and teach the commandments. Moreover, the overall focus of Matthew 5-7 is, quote, on the teaching of Jesus and is intended to be didactic in function. It would seem then that the sense of fully doing or revealing true meaning fits this context better than the idea of completing. Consequently, in Matthew 5:17, fulfilling the law and prophets should be understood as fully doing and teaching them, corresponding again to Matthew 5:19, whoever does them and teaches them. Indeed, just as relaxes in verse 19 parallels abolish in verse 17, does and teaches in verse 19 parallels fulfill in verse 17. In other words, Jesus fulfills the law and prophets by teaching and demonstrating the proper way to observe them as God intended. Stephen Stiles puts it well, quote, plerao carries the idea of fulfilling or doing a requirement or religious obligation to its fullest. In the case of Matthew 5:17, it has to do with being completely obedient to the Torah and teaching it properly. However, some interpreters disagree with this understanding of to fulfill and argue that, in Matthew 5:17, the verb instead carries the meaning of bring to completion. According to this interpretation, Jesus came to fulfill the law and prophets by satisfying their prophetic predictions. Proponents of this understanding include R.L. Solberg and Andy Stanley. Solberg contends that when Jesus said he came to fulfill the law and prophets, he was referring to fulfilling the messianic types and prophecies within the law and prophets, particularly those predicting his death on the cross. Quote, Jesus indeed came not to abolish but fulfill what the law required. And what did the law require? A perfect sacrifice for sin. And since the Messiah's death on the cross, quote, fulfilled what the Torah was pointing toward, this means that, quote, Christians today are not bound by the legal requirements of the law of Moses. Similarly, Andy Stanley remarks, quote, Jesus did not abolish the law when he fulfilled it, but in fulfilling it, he made it obsolete. In addition to Solberg and Stanley, Matthew Vines goes to the extent of arguing that continuing to obey the Torah after Jesus fulfilled it diminishes Jesus' work on the cross. Quote, once Christ fulfilled the law, his followers would have trivialized his sacrifice by living as though they were still subject to the law's constraints. Hence, according to these interpreters, fulfilling the law results in the law coming to an end. But did Jesus really make the law of Moses obsolete by fulfilling it? Even if we grant the assumption that to fulfill the law and prophets in Matthew 5:17 means to fulfill the prophetic symbols and predictions found in the law and prophets, there are several problems with the idea that this would somehow result in the law coming to an end. The biggest problem with this idea is that it sounds exactly like what Jesus said he did not come to do. There is no difference between abolishing something and making it obsolete. The result is the same, and since Jesus contrasts fulfill with abolish, these words cannot mean the same thing. Additionally, if we apply this logic consistently, we could reasonably conclude that many other practices that most Christians believe we should observe have become obsolete. For instance, Jesus' death and resurrection fulfilled the symbolism of baptism, but nobody believes that baptism is now obsolete and that we shouldn't baptize new believers. During the Last Supper, Jesus said that the bread and wine pointed toward his work of redemption. Jesus then fulfilled what they pointed toward, but nobody concludes from this that Christians shouldn't partake in the bread and wine. Hence, why should we think that Jesus fulfilling the law and prophets through his work on the cross renders them irrelevant for Christian practice? Finally, as I will discuss in further detail in my videos on verses 18 and 19, the immediate context further complicates this interpretation. Jesus continues his statement on the law and prophets by announcing that nothing will pass from the law until heaven and earth pass away, and warns against disregarding the commandments of the law. It makes little sense to insist upon keeping the Torah and warn about the consequences of breaking the Torah if the Torah itself is about to become irrelevant. In contrast to teachers like R.L. Solberg, Andy Stanley, Matthew Vines, and others, it is best to understand the statement, "I came to fulfill the law and prophets," as "I came to bring out the full meaning of the law and prophets." Jesus fulfills the law and prophets by teaching and demonstrating how to obey them properly. Not only does this meaning of fulfill fit the context much better than the idea of fulfilling prophecy, but it also provides an actual contrast with the word abolish. It seems strange for Jesus to contrast the notion of nullifying the Torah's commandments with the idea of fulfilling prophecy, but it makes perfect sense for Jesus to contrast the notion of nullifying the Torah's commandments with the idea of affirming them. Conclusion. In Matthew 5:17, Jesus announces that he did not come to abolish the law or prophets. In fact, he explicitly commands us not even to think that he came to do that. Instead, he says that he came to fulfill them. Considering the context, the verb to fulfill in this verse does not mean to bring to completion in the sense of fulfilling prophecy, nor does this term imply that Jesus made the law obsolete. Rather, Jesus coming to fulfill the law and prophets means that he came to confirm the authority of the law and the prophets through his teachings and actions. He came to reveal the true meaning of the law and prophets by teaching and demonstrating how to obey them properly. In our next video, we will be going through the following verse, Matthew 5:18, and learning about what Jesus meant when he said that nothing from the law will pass until heaven and earth pass away and until all is accomplished. I hope to see you there. And by the way, if you are interested in further study on this passage, consider getting my short book, How Jesus Fulfilled the Law, a Pro-Nomian pocket guide to Matthew 5:17-20. Until next time, blessings and shalom. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. If you want to see more content like this, I want to invite you to subscribe to my channel. Also, don't forget to hit that little bell so that you'll be notified when new videos like this are released. One last thing, be sure to connect with me on my website, davidwilber.com. There, you can find a ton of free resources like articles and videos, learn more about the books that I've written, and subscribe to my newsletter to ensure you never miss an update. Again, thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you next time.